sure everybody knows who Gretchen is, but I'm going to tell you just a little bit about her because she's amazing. She has been an advocate for women, survivors of gender-based violence, and immigrant communities for over 2 decades. She has served in the Office of the Attorney General, the Kentucky Association of Sexual Assault Programs, the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, the Center for Women and Families, and the Backside Learning Center, and now leads the Office for Women for Metro Government. Through her work in the nonprofit and government sector, she has represented survivors of violence, championed legislative reforms, trained professionals at the local, state, regional, and national level, created coalitions, managed state and federal grants, and overseen project development and fundraising. She has taught as an adjunct professor at the University of Louisville and Brandeis School of Law and continues to consult at the regional and national level on human trafficking. In 2019, she was inducted into the Kentucky Civil Rights Hall of Fame for her work on behalf of women's rights. So she's going to talk to us today about the Office for Women to elevate the status of women through education, advocacy, and legislation. She's going to tell us about recent legislative successes, detailed plans for initiatives to foster women's economic development and leadership in 2023, and tell us how we can get involved and help. Please take the floor.
Thank you so much, Tricia, and to Kristen, and to Lisa. And I just want to say, first of all, it's wonderful to be back physically in this space. Second, it's really powerful to be in a space that is entirely led by women right now, right? Like, look at how women are leading the bar in this state and in this city. So it's really wonderful also to be back in Louisville. I started my career here at the Center for Women and Families 23 years ago now as a baby lawyer doing immigration law, and it's really wonderful to be back in the community. I came back to Louisville a couple of years ago, but then COVID hit, so I didn't get to see folks as well. So I'm really always excited to partner and continue to build work collaboratively with folks. So if you have ideas for the Office for Women, definitely reach out. So I want to give you a sense of the scope of our office. Just by a show of hands, how many people already knew that Louisville, that your tax dollars fund an Office for Women? Okay, a few people, right? So it's been in existence since 1991. Then Mayor created it. Marcia Roth was the director at the time. Her first intern was none other than our new mayor, Craig Greenberg. So he was an intern. He was the very first intern at the Office for Women. And very quickly in the scope of the office, she was looking at primarily being tasked with looking at women's economic status. There was a lot of work in the early 90s on women in the workplace and pay equity. But there was a high-profile domestic violence murder-suicide that occurred in 1991, impacting 2 teachers, public high school teachers, who really galvanized the community and led to a lot of reforms, led in no small part by the Office for Women on domestic violence and on VINE, which is victim identification and notification every day, which some of you may use with your clients, that is piloted all over the world. I say that to you also to say that very quickly in the office, there was a sense that for women to thrive, and indeed for communities to thrive, you have to look holistically. And so if women weren't safe, they couldn't thrive economically. 23 years later, I'm also still looking at those entrenched problems of domestic violence, sexual violence, the high rate of domestic violence murders are in our city, especially impacting Black women, which is really a call for concern. And I'm saying, you know what, we need to maybe rethink those and also be thinking about women's economic status as a way to ameliorate some of those issues. So I give you that history. I was also a 15-year-old, and my teacher was the one who shot his wife and himself in that domestic violence murder, suicide. So I really feel like this is a circling back around, and it's a continued call to action, and it's still sobering that we have to be doing this work to justify really the existence and safety of women, in particular women who are more marginalized by historic racism, by poverty, by other issues. So that's a little bit of kind of the mission of the office. We do the work that we do not through direct service. So while I get calls from constituents, often about domestic violence or housing, I would say those are the top 2 calls from women in the city, mostly I'm looking at systems change. How can we add value? And so we are looking at what are the long-term solutions that we can make. And so that includes legislative work. I've given you our year in review. We collaborate. I'm an office of 1, so I can only work when I partner with you all, and that really usually means I'm asking you to do work for me, so I want to be transparent in that. But it is also very important that we are collaborating with community and doing the work. We have 7 areas of focus as well. So it's not just one area. It's looking at women's social and economic well-being, housing, education. While health is not listed in there, health is impacted by all these social determinants of health, gender-based violence, human trafficking, civic engagement. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit, as Tricia said, about what we've done legislatively in the past year, because lawyers like to learn about laws, right? Even if they are local laws at the Metro Council level. And then about some of our priority areas, how we are. I've been in this position for almost a year, and I've learned a lot in the first year about how we can be impactful and how to use the limited resources to have most lasting impact. So here's an example of a few kinds of events we have held in the past, focused on raising awareness of women's status and gender equity. And I'm going to zero in on some of the legislative reforms that we worked on. I've worked in Frankfurt on legislation for many years. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, it's been really hard to get a lot of legislation passed for various reasons. But here at the local level, you have a more immediate, impact. And at the same time that I started at the Office for Women, the Women's Caucus was formed at Metro Council by Councilwoman Paula McCraney, Councilwoman Cassie Chambers Armstrong. So it was a really great example of how organizations of women can partner together and harness energy. So I think of the Women Lawyers Association also as one of the examples of an organization that we could partner with. So we worked on a couple of pieces of legislation, and I'm going to highlight one in particular. And that is that we got Cassie Chambers Armstrong, Councilwoman Cassie Chambers Armstrong sponsored this. Co-sponsor was Councilwoman Nicole George, who's now Deputy Mayor Nicole George in the new administration. Paid leave for domestic violence victims and victims of other crimes who are Louisville Metro government employees, LMG employees. This is a big deal. How many of you all do civil practice, do any kind of, whether it's small claims or big things, right? We know that oftentimes equity means making people whole. And so one of the ways that we know that combating gender-based violence in particular is most effective is to wrap around support to the survivor. And one of the barriers for many survivors is they can't go to meet with a counselor and work on a safety plan, or go to court and get a protective order, or go meet with their detective, or change their kids' schools because they've relocated, or do any other activity that would help keep them safe. Because they fear that I can't tell my employer, I might get fired, something might happen. And so we knew that doing paid leave, making sure that women and men as well and other gender diverse individuals would not be harmed by being victims. So they now have 7 days paid leave, which is really progressive. And so we are hoping that that is a model for other workplaces across here. So, push on your law firms to do it. And I will say that the rates of gender-based violence in our community are so high that there are survivors in any space, right? 1 in 3 women in Kentucky, for example. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but I just want to say I think that folks in the room would understand why gender equity is important and what it is. The point I want to underscore, though, is that we have got to address gender equity in Louisville. It is at the heart of many of the persistent issues and problems that are facing our community. High rate of homicides are disproportionately domestic violence homicides, disproportionately impacting Black women because of historic racism, lack of access to resources. We have a housing crisis, an affordable housing crisis. That primarily is impacting women, single women head of households in our community, right? We have persistent pay inequality. We have a crumbling childcare infrastructure that is only going to get worse in 2 years when ARPA funds go away. How many lawyers in the room had difficulty with childcare during the pandemic? Anybody? Right, so almost a third of the people in this room. And these are presumably people with resources. So you think about under-resourced women who may have even fewer options. So we know that we have to address these issues because they impact the entire community. And that's what we're trying very hard at the Office for Women to do. And my call to action to you all early on is to say that if you can raise the status of this work, talk about the need to focus on gender equity in our communities and invest in women, that helps us raise awareness about how this needs to be a central discussion. We need to be asking these questions that Are we having a gender perspective? Do we consider the impact on women? Do we have women at the table who are most impacted, who are making these decisions? So our theme and strategic direction for our office in 2023 is invest in women. I think of that because I think it's a very concrete goal. This means to pour into women. This does not mean that we don't pour into men and boys in our city, but what it means is we know, and global research on this shows, that if you invest in women, if you invest dollars in women, it is far more likely to then be spent on education, health, and growth in the home, thereby leading to higher economic growth in the community. This is good policy, essentially. Even if you don't consider yourself a feminist, even if you don't care about these issues, this is a very workable strategy. So investing in women looks a few different ways. We are investing in women in the Office for Women, pouring into women in civic engagement and leadership. So we're launching the Office for Women Ambassadors training program next Thursday. It's a 6-month leadership training program for women from across the community, very diverse women with diverse lived experiences who will learn about issues impacting women, government services impacting women, nonprofits doing great work empowering women, how to advocate and lobby in Metro Council, how to aspire to serve on boards and commissions, how to start up a business if you're an entrepreneur, with the goal of more women being ambassadors for our work and for government to share the information about what we do, but then being a circular communication loop back to us to advocate and say, hey, in our community, Office for Women, you're not looking at this issue. You need to be addressing this issue. We are investing in girls. We hope to have a girls conference. So this is another call to action. If anybody's interested in that or being a sponsor for a girls conference this summer, we hope to do a conference for girls and non-binary kiddos so that they can work on empowerment and policy and other issues that they would like to do. We do a Women's Equality Day every year. We also are really focused on implementing gender equity in economic development and workforce development. So oftentimes, I don't know if anybody has ever heard, but there's this idea of pink issues. You hear of the pink tax for diapers and period products. Sometimes they're seen as pink issues. How many people have ever been at their firm or their organization and heard about housekeeping duties? Maybe that word's gone away, but if you're doing a meeting, who usually does all the work to make the meeting possible, effective, and go? It's often women, right? The labor that women do is often seen as less valued. There's gender segregation in work. And then at the same time, sometimes offices for women have been seen as offices that maybe work on a certain set of issues. We are trying very hard, and I can use your help in doing this, in making sure that gender equity is central to any big initiatives going on in this city, whether they're in the corporate sector, in the nonprofit sector, in the government sector. So that's the big picture, 33,000-foot view. But what I want to look at is a couple things. We are having a gender equity data series. That's wonky sounding, but we know that we need to sometimes get the numbers and the data in there to galvanize action and policy. So our first one was on women's income and housing and home ownership with a gender equity and racial equity focus. The second one is going to be probably in March, and it's going to be on the childcare infrastructure. And so laying out where we are in Louisville, what investments need to be made, what changes need to be made. We're going to be doing a Women's Economic Summit. This is another call to action. This is an idea of a one-stop shop, bringing together all the terrific folks in the community, Goodwill, Kentuckiana Works, Louisville Urban League, Office of Community Resiliency Services, Dress for Success, you name it, all these things in one big space where women can travel through in that day, do a resume, get their job outfit for an interview, get the things that they need, all for women, childcare provided. That's another event that we would like to do that we'll be needing partners and sponsors with. All right, so lastly, I just want to say one more area. If you see, I don't think the Women Lawyers Association did work on this, but if you want to, we can do more. Last year, we were successful in helping to scale the distribution of diapers in the city of Louisville. You all may know, if you have little ones, how expensive diapers are. 1/3 of U.S. families can't afford diapers. It's a barrier to employment. You can't send your kids to childcare without diapers. And so we helped the St. Bernadette Diaper Bank, which distributes to area nonprofits, to double their distribution last year, and also work with Councilwoman Paula McCraney to file a resolution asking Frankfurt legislature to pass a ban on, to end the sales tax on diapers and period products. So stay tuned for more work around that. Plug out there to the universe is I would like to also see in our schools, both private and public, that there are dispensers in every bathroom of period products. I think this is a basic issue of dignity of girls. If we were able to get masks and PPP out in places, it shows us what we can do when we put our mind to it. So that's another call to action if you want to help gather that or help advocate for those issues. You can be involved with the Office for Women if you scan the purple flyer, and it has a QR code. You can go to our website and you can sign up for our newsletter. Lastly, I will say I didn't talk a lot about gender-based violence, and that's one gap here, but we are going to be bringing in UGIMA, which is the National Center on Violence Against Women in the Black community, to do a training. And so day one will be for system providers to look at things like implicit bias and how we can improve our approaches, very much targeted at reducing that rate of homicides of Black women in our community. We are also going to be focusing more on missing girls and women who in our community have been disproportionately Black and brown girls, and those families need lawyers. So stay tuned, because we hope to be partnering with area organizations to do a training, a CLE of people who might want to be pro bono attorneys to assist families in those cases, sometimes when they might need advocacy. So those are a couple calls to action: period products, CLE for helping with missing girl cases, and all the other initiatives I have laid out for you. So that's a quick overview.